We're on an adventure to address the loss and degradation of fish habitat nationwide. Our mission is to protect, restore, and enhance fish and aquatic communities through partnership and collaboration, and we've been doing it for 10 years.
And I feel like our effort really does that in prioritizing different aspects of why it's important to work together in harmony in, say, all this conservation work that was going on the ground.
This was the first national landscape level initiative to address aquatic resources, aquatic habitat, and fisheries in this country in a systematic, science-based way, not unlike what had occurred in the bird world, especially with waterfowl, ducks and geese and other migratory birds a decade or more previously. So the fish community was kind of like bellying up to the bar and entering that world in a meaningful way, and it was really exciting.
The National Fish Habitat Partnership brought about a real instrumental change in the country in terms of how we view opportunities to conserve and restore and enhance our nation's fisheries resources at a broader landscape scale. For the first time, that really allowed us to work well across state boundaries, really looking at these conservation issues from a broader geographic perspective, looking at entire species ranges. And without that framework, we'd really be lacking that comprehensive look at where are the important priority areas and what can we do that will make the most conservation difference and meaningful difference on the ground in terms of conservation for the species. Without NFHAP, we wouldn't have that framework in which to operate.
Having a concentrated effort on really tracking our projects, having a database that really follows all projects and aspects and different work that is being done on them, monitoring them. Has this made a difference 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? What kind of a condition is this project that we did years ago in? And is it making a difference in terms of providing more access for fishing, more anglers in the water? Thinking about things like that, I think, are very important and things that I would like to see our board and our effort go to in the next 10 years.
Well, you know, it's surprising because most people on the face of it would think we're all about fish. We're actually all about people. And, you know, that's the important aspect of this. We're talking about folks who are committed to these partnerships, looking for resources that they can use to leverage and attract additional monies for these bigger projects. Looking at the results which impact their communities, how much interest they generate in their communities about the work they're doing. So it's all about the people.
The delta of today is highly changed from what it was naturally. Back in the 1800s, before the gold rush and the resulting population boom in the state, the delta was a dynamic and wild system of tidal wetlands, riparian forests, and vast seasonal floodplains. As the state has developed, we've lost these critical habitats at alarming rates. The real loss has been to our aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems, the native fish, birds, and wildlife that depend on these habitats to survive.
The significance of the Delta extends well beyond its legal boundaries. It's the heart of California's water supply and serves millions of residents, agricultural lands, and businesses all the way from the Bay Area to San Diego. Our health, the health of the environment, and the security of our water supply all depend on this delta.
California is the fifth largest economy on Earth. And what's that economy run on? It runs on water. So why would someone, in one of our big cities care about fish or levees in the upper Sacramento Valley? And the answer is simple, because with updated water infrastructure, we have a functioning river system. And a functioning river system means that we have robust, healthy populations of fish. And that means that we're better able to pass water to our farms and to our cities and have a more secure water supply for California and California's economy.
The Eco-Restore initiative began 3 years ago as a means of placing additional emphasis on some long-standing project implementation needs. The goal was simple and ambitious: 30,000 acres of habitat restoration and enhancement within 5 years. This is basically a doubling of the amount of habitat that's out there on the ground now. In 2018, the initiative and all the partners it collaborates with broke ground on 5 projects that stretch 70 miles across the Delta. These projects remove barriers to fish migration that have been in place for 100 years, establish new tidal and wetland habitats, and increase the amount of forest along our rivers for birds and other species as well.
DWR is the lead agency on the majority of Eco-Restore projects, and that simply reflects DWR's ongoing commitment both to our mitigation responsibilities that are connected to the long-term operations of the state and federal water project, but also our obligation and our responsibility to pursue habitat restoration for habitat restoration's sake. We're not striving just towards 30,000 acres of restoration. Acreage is great, but if you're a fish, if you're an upland mammal, if you're a bird, what you really care about is ecosystem function. And that's truly what we're going for through the Eco-Restore program. It's how all these projects link together on the landscape with what's already out there and what's planned for the future.
With Eco-Restore, it created a situation where it was a priority for the state. It wasn't just an agency within the state, it was a statewide mandate to get this habitat restoration done. And that makes all the difference in the world. It creates a situation where everybody's working more closely together and with a common purpose. And so I think maintaining a program like Eco-Restore is a critical factor. Without that, we go back to what we saw before Eco-Restore, where things just kind of move along gradually and don't happen very quickly, if at all.
Not only is Eco-Restore providing a common purpose for the department, but it's prompting us to take an important look at how we implement our habitat restoration in the Delta. Integration of ecological principles into project planning, design, and operations is critical to the work that we do. And nowhere is that integration more important than here in the Delta.
So the Delta Conservancy has a dual role, essentially, to do ecosystem restoration as well as economic development in the Delta. And one of the things that we strive to do is integrate the local interest and voice into the planning for restoration in the Delta over time.
The Nature Conservancy has been active in the Delta for about 20 years. And it's really interesting within that 20 years what we've learned. And so the question is, what do we do moving forward? And the Nature Conservancy or the state are not going to be able to do this by themselves. As we see on McCormick, Williamson, and other projects, it's going to be a partnership. It has to be a partnership between landowners, the state, the Nature Conservancy, and other organizations that work in the Delta.
Perhaps the most valuable aspect of the initiative is the alignment among California's conservation leaders. This alignment leads to prioritization of scarce resources towards these priority projects and demonstrated on-the-ground results.
When you study ecology and you design a restoration project, it forces you to ask, what did the site used to look like? So we developed this idea, along with the Department of Water Resources, of multi-benefit flood management projects that not only provide flood risk reduction benefits, but at the same time give more room to the river.
The Delta is unique in so many ways. Home to historic towns, generations of Californians, vibrant agriculture, treasured for a range of recreational opportunities. It's also a biodiversity hotspot, the largest estuary in the Western Americas and home to hundreds of species. At the same time, it's a microcosm of the challenges we face in California, including climate change and its impacts on our natural environment, as well as ecosystem decline. Eco-Restore is a big idea and an ambitious approach to address these challenges head on. And it represents the type of win-win strategy that we need in California. How do we restore and protect our environment for the benefit of fish and wildlife in ways that work for local communities? It exemplifies a new approach that Governor Newsom has talked about, which sets aside old binaries. It's not fish versus farms, it's fish and farms. It's not north versus south, it's one California. Moving forward, Eco-Restore really represents and symbolizes what we will be advancing in California, water and environmental policy that works for everyone.
The city of Tillamook, Oregon, located in the heart of Oregon's coastal dairylands, lies adjacent to Tillamook Bay. Designated as an estuary of national significance, Tillamook Bay is a diverse and productive ecosystem and watershed. Approximately 1 mile north of downtown Tillamook, the Southern Flow Corridor Landowner Preferred Alternative Project is located at the head of Tillamook Bay and at the confluence of the Wilson, Trask, and Tillamook rivers. This innovative project will restore 521 acres of tidal wetland habitat while reducing flooding to 3,000 acres of land in the community of Tillamook. The project, developed over many years through the efforts of a large and varied set of stakeholders, is unique, bringing federal government agencies together with state and local partners on a collaborative project that seeks to serve the needs of citizens, reduce flooding, provide economic benefits to the community, and restore important habitat for native fish and wildlife species.
Tillamook Bay in particular is unique in a couple of senses. It's one of the larger estuaries on the Oregon coast, and it's also been one of the most highly manipulated estuaries in terms of diking and filling and draining of wetlands. Well, a number of the fish species, particularly Chinook and coho, are really dependent on the estuary for their juvenile life stage. They come down to the estuary to rear. These are fish that are going to use the tidal channels, the fringes of estuary salt marshes for their rearing. And since the time Europeans settled this area, till now we've lost about 85% of the estuarine wetlands that these fish had historically.
I showed up down in Tillamook County. They had been wrestling with flooding that was very destructive economically. It was a problem for the reputation of the county. There had been multiple presidentially declared flood declarations, disaster declarations.
Here is the big reason most people cannot get into Tillamook tonight: a flood, basically surrounding the community, stranding drivers, making it virtually impossible to get in or out of Tillamook tonight. Motorists left their cars in the middle of what was once Highway 101. Today, a state of emergency was declared by Governor Kitzhaber.
Flooding is indigenous to this area, and it always has been. Last winter, last December, when it rained so much, it was the first year in the memory of anyone I've talked to, and I talk to people who are 90 years old regularly, first time they ever saw it flooded that much, 4 feet deep, and it came up on both sides of 101.
People were getting tired of trying to address flooding issues. And how do we fix it? And there was as many ideas as there were people about how to reduce flooding in Tillamook. Betsy and I were chosen by the governor as co-conveners, and then we started through the Oregon Solutions process.
Oregon Solutions is a collaborative problem-solving process, an opportunity for a group of frequently not like-minded folks to coalesce around a problem statement and postulate a solution and then work to effectuate that.
And that's where the Southern Flow Corridor project came through.
I've been working on this project for more than a decade. The project area is 640 acres, and by the time we're done, we will have restored 521 acres into a range of habitats from mudflat to high salt marsh. During the flood, the water crosses 101 and immediately hits a whole series of cross levees and old dredge material disposal sites. It backs up when it hits those obstacles, flows north along 101 and floods the north end of town. The flood reduction component of this project is to remove those levees and dredge material sites to create a corridor for the water to reach the bay. Once you remove those levees, you open up a whole series of ancient channels. So you create 14 miles of habitat for salmon at the confluence of major salmon-producing rivers. And I can imagine there may be an increasing number of folks who come to this area to watch the newly emerged portion of the bay as it evolves. This project has a myriad of benefits for fish and for people.
My father moved up here from Ontario, California in 1977, so I'm the second generation to run this particular dairy here. The project in one form or another has been going on since the late 90s. It's been controversial. It's been a long road. Where some of the controversy comes in on a local level is loss of agricultural property, but this is important for Tillamook and Oregon, and so we took another look at it and approached it from a different angle. We wanted to help navigate that conversation to a conclusion to where we are at today. The goals of the project has been to maximize the flood reduction benefits that we can get out of it by maintaining as much usable agricultural properties adjacent to any restoration work that's done in that area, and also create opportunities to enhance the farmability of those properties, and we're feeling pretty good about it.
Theoretically, it's supposed to drop the water about 18 inches on the fringes of the flood. Well, that is where a lot of people live, and that was pretty exciting.
But we're trying to control that last inch or foot that creates the in my home scenario. And the trauma and the stress that's involved in that kind of event for somebody, I mean, is devastating.
You know, thousands of acres this is going to help out. People with residents out and about and farmers. It's kind of a win-win for us.
This area we're standing in right here is the Wilson Trask wetland, then known as the Tillamook wetlands, and now it's known as the Southern Flow Corridor. The school has used this area since 2005 as an outside laboratory. So we bring students here from second grade all the way through the community college. We've been doing a lot of invasive species mapping. There's an awful lot of invasive plants out in this area. So in flooding those with salt water is probably going to do a lot to return this area away from its non-native condition back towards a native condition as to what it was before they built all the dikes that are around this area. And it's going to be fun to come back now and use it as a living laboratory as it changes back into a tidal wetland. So it'll be different. It'll be a whole different habitat, but it's going to be a really fantastic opportunity.
Reconstruction activities began at the project site in February of 2016. The contractor, Thompson Brothers Excavating, mobilized to the site the first week in May to begin construction in earnest. Activities included the demolition of former farm buildings, the removal of a house, the clearing of brush and trees, the removal of existing levees, the construction of new levees farther away from the estuary, the elimination and relocation of tide gates, the excavation of approximately 234,000 cubic yards of fill, the excavation and connection of tidal channels, and the remediation of contaminated fill materials at a former mill site. Permitting and funding the project required a substantial investment from federal agency partners who recognized its potential benefits not just for fish and wildlife, but also for the community. A new model that could be adopted by future projects nationwide.
Cut!
Project construction concluded in November of 2016. Post-construction monitoring operations begin in 2017.
Getting to follow this site whose context we understand really well so we know what makes it tick, and getting to measure those things that make it tick and follow it through its restoration process, that alone is really exciting and wonderful. Effectiveness monitoring is measuring things to see whether the restoration worked or not. So often for the first year or two after you remove the dikes and the tide water is coming back in, it's very wet, and the plants that are there don't really like this new set of conditions and they're going to die back. All that dying vegetation produces a ton of food for insects, and so often that's very productive for fish. The young salmon are going to be in there in force eating all of the different little insects that are feeding on that decaying vegetation. And also lots of shorebirds and waterfowl, and it'll support a whole lot of life at every stage of its restoration.
In terms of Chinook and coho populations in Tillamook Bay, if you compare what we have now to what we believe we had historically, we may have had as many as 200,000 coho coming back on average. Now, if we get 20,000 to Tillamook Bay, that's a pretty decent year. Chinook, maybe not as heavily impacted. We estimate the population probably averages around 15,000 fish. Historically, it was probably more like 50 or 60,000. In terms of benefits to fish and fisheries, this project is going to restore about 28% of the habitat that's currently available. Mother Nature is going to take over and shape the area like she sees fit. We estimate that that increased production could be as much as 7,000 adult fish return on a good year. So that's huge. They're certainly an iconic species and we need to protect them, and the more that we have, the happier everybody's going to be.
You have 5 major river systems that flow into essentially a very small area. What's the resolution to this? You're not just going to move all the businesses out of town. You're not just going to buy up all the dairies. You're not going to say, well, let's just dam the rivers up. You've got to work together to say, okay, this is what we have. Now let's figure out what we have and how can we make this work.
The Southern Flow Corridor project is the culmination of a huge community exercise designed to try to harmonize divergent points of view about how to fix a chronic problem in Tillamook County.
We're going to save the best farmland in the project, reducing flooding over 3,000 acres and benefiting 540 structures. That's a big benefit from a 640-acre project area.
We are the estuary. Everybody here in Tillamook is part of that estuary. We all need to work on having a healthy estuary. We all participate in it, we all benefit from it. And without a healthy estuary, we're not going to have a robust dairy community here. It really moves into a win-win situation as long as we always continue to bring everybody together.
Our goal is to have a farm that's viable 25 years from now. You know, we got to save the dirt, we got to have clean water. It all plays into that.
Water quality, we feel, is very important. We're just trying to make the land better now than it was when we got it.
Like I say, it's just really nice to come out here after a hard rain and see that there's no damage. Not seeing a whole bunch of gullies and dirt going down the river, and it's not only benefiting me, but benefits the people down below.
I'm Kevin Keener with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. I'm a soil scientist. Since 2009, I've been working on the Root River Field to Stream Partnership. The purpose of the project is to produce a better understanding of how agricultural practices affect water quality. Starting in 2009, we installed equipment in the streams. Within the watershed, we also picked 1 or 2 locations where we're actually measuring field runoff from actual fields. Really, the first 6 years with this project is to get a science-based information on how much runoff is happening and when it's happening. And the second phase of the project is to work with producers to install additional practices to see what effect it may have on the water quality. One of the key findings that we learned during the first 7 years of the study is that on average about 7% of the precipitation that fell on the monitored fields ran off the surface. And this amount varied by site and by year. And in a dry year we found less than 1%, and in a wet year we found nearly 25% run off the field surface. So how we manage this runoff, can have a big impact on the water quality of a receiving stream or river. The data also showed that our fields are really most susceptible to loss in May and June, and what we found was that about 80% of the annual soil loss and over 60% of the nutrients attached to that soil occurred in those 2 months. And in most cases, it was a relatively small area of the field that was responsible for most of this loss. So targeting these critical source areas at the right place and at the right time, and also making sure that our existing conservation practices are working properly, were really key pieces of information that were used by the partnership to help guide the approach used during the field walkovers.
I'm Ron Miners. I'm a private contractor, and I was asked to come in and help with the walkover process on the Field to Stream Partnership project. A project like this needed to start with conversations with the landowners to get started. And once we had that behind us, we physically walked the tracts of land trying to identify resource needs. We wanted to know if they would be willing to address the highest priority site that we saw on the farm. We didn't want to overburden them with a whole bunch of work. We wanted to make it simple for them. Landowner participation rate in the field walkovers was an incredible 98%. And within just 2 years, over 60% of those cooperators had already addressed or are in the process of fixing their high priority areas on their farms. We still have more work to do, but that speaks volumes about the farmers' commitment to help improve water quality in these study watersheds. And we are very thankful to those cooperators. What I also learned from doing the field walkovers is that farmers already have a lot of practices in place, and most were in really good condition, but about a third of those practices, especially the grass waterways, were not functioning properly and needed additional maintenance.
The waterways require maintenance, obviously, as they're doing their job and catching sediment and the silting. They need reshape every 10 years is probably not a average number, but as you go from farm to farm, it varies on what kind of tillage they're doing. If they're doing no-till and that type of thing, that's a huge impact on the life of the waterway and our life of the structures and the sediment that they have to collect.
My name is Josh. Steph and I farm here together with my parents, Joyce and Jerry, and we have 150 milk cows, and we farm 420 acres of cropland. When Kevin and Ron came out and to talk about doing the walkovers, I was open to it. I mean, I think it helps to have a different set of eyes to look at the practices that we have been doing. And I think after Ron did the walkover, we had discussed the high priority areas. agreed that the manure pit that we had, which was a 20,000 gallon manure pit, which would fill up in 5 days, was something that would really need to be replaced. When that 20,000 gallon pit would fill up in 5 days, we would have to just load up, and whether the conditions were right or anything, we would have to go and apply that manure. So the project that we're putting in, it's a 1.9 million gallon all concrete manure storage with a ramp to drive down into the pit to help with the sand. With the way our numbers are right now, it's something that we can just empty in the fall and get all of our manure applied in the fall, and we can get it incorporated right away and be able to utilize the manure for fertilizer as opposed to almost treating it like a waste.
Dave Metzink, we farm here with my son and my wife and daughter-in-law in Caramona Township. We raise corn, soybeans, oats, hay, and from a livestock standpoint, we raise hogs. I have a 90 cow beef herd. Ron came out and described the project, and waterways were, on these two farms we had, waterways were the vehicle to use for the conservation to do our part. We liked the looks of it, and we liked the way it all turned out. And one thing that you don't think about when you put in a waterway, it gives us a natural contour line to start our corn planting. So we actually farm the farm a lot better now than we did before that waterway was there, from a row crop standpoint. And it's a fine line. We want to be environmentally correct, but we have to be economically correct too. I know that there's water monitoring down in the creek, and so it'll be interesting to see and look at the data over the years to see how much have we improved that water quality.
It excites me when landowners can come together as a group and talk amongst each others and see the benefits from a project like this.
I think this project has really helped elevate the conversation in terms of conservation and farming. Without having good science-based information, it's difficult to have a good conversation about water quality and ag practices. And so as producers put more practices on the ground, it provides, I think, another opportunity to showcase the benefits of those practices.
Our goal is to make it better than when we found it and leave the land for the next generation.
I've heard it called the Sokol Dam, the Pine Meadow Ranch Dam. Definitely has a presence though, a history.
From 30,000 feet, one would think that getting fish past the dam and keeping them in the creek would be pretty easy, but it's not that simple though.
For over 100 years, Waichus Creek has been the primary source of irrigation water for the Pine Meadow Ranch. From the dam, water flowed nearly a mile down an irrigation ditch to the ranch.
That's how the water got here. The original dam, which was big logs, diverted it into the ditch, which came from there down to the ranch.
It was 1994. My brother was tired of the dam washing out all the time, the old one, and my brother never did anything, kind of. He went out there and took 120 yards of concrete and enough rebar probably to build a house.
He managed to have enough engineering know-how to build an extremely good one that nothing budged it.
And it was something that he was really proud of.
In 2009, the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council reached out to the Sokol family to begin exploring ways to help fish migrate past the dam so they could reach many miles of important spawning habitat upstream.
I'll admit I was a little nervous when I first came to meet them. I didn't know what to think, if they would fit me into a category of an environmentalist kind of pushing his agenda without concern for their agenda or their values.
Matthias and Ryan show up and I'm going like, what in the heck is going on here? I'm going like, wait, it's our water. We can do what we want with it.
Naturally, we were a little leery about, well, what do they want to do?
We told them that one of the options available to them was to leave the dam in place and address fish passage. But with reintroduction of salmon and steelhead well underway, there was going to be a lot of attention brought to the dam.
While the irrigation dam worked well for many years, its operation and maintenance ultimately became a burden for the ranch. Following annual floods, the creek would change course and bypass the dam, or simply leave the ditch full of debris.
It caused a lot of problems. It was always flooding, washing out. The younger generation seems to like driving four-wheelers through ditches until they would break the ditches down and the water would go elsewhere.
I think over time what we learned is really being able to listen to each other and really at a certain point understanding what was important to Doro and to Chris and for the ranch.
They'd go away and answer our questions, and then they'd come back and we'd meet again. And we're going like, no, yes, no, yes. And that went on for several years.
Is to kind of really explore those alternatives before one rose to the top and became evident that that's the one we wanted to take advantage of.
My brother had always dreamed of having a pivot. So I go like, well, I want a pivot.
After 5 years of meetings and negotiations, some elegant solutions began to emerge. Solutions that eliminated the need for the dam and improved irrigation. Solutions that would also open the door to more holistic restoration of the entire stream ecosystem.
I'm very pleased with the way the pivot operates because it creates much better continuous water on the land.
I don't know how, all of a sudden, it kind of became okay with me and realizing it was okay for the dam to be taken down, but they never pushed about it. They understood what it meant to us.
Seeing the dam coming out after 5 years of all this work, it's pretty exciting, I'll admit. In the end, it was representative of all the time we had spent finding the right solution. The dam was a symbol of unlocking all these other benefits to the project.
It's really cool to be a part of something that is so successful. It's like, why can't we do this with the rest of the world?
My son-in-law, who is an avid fly fisherman, as I was, caught 3 fish the other day in the creek. The only problem was that 3 of them were about 8 inches total.
That was a huge investment and it was a risk, but it was well worth it.
It was a win for everybody. We were all working together.
We started with a project that just looked at fish passage and fish screening, and we ended up with 13 miles of upstream habitat opened up. Fish are staying in the creek. We are also looking at 1 cubic foot per second of senior water right permanently protected in stream. And we're looking at a whole new floodplain that's going to be reconnected to Whitechoose Creek. 170 acres of riparian restoration, so it's pretty exciting to see all those pieces come into it.
I could call them up and rant, and they wouldn't hang up on me.
I still get a little bit of hair coming up on my neck when Tasha comes bounding towards me, but I know that she's usually pretty excited to see me now versus wanting to bite my hand off.
No, I didn't think he'd ever give up because it's something that had to be done.
When the river's flooding, it's full of juvenile salmon, coho and chinook and all the different species, and they need to get out of that floodwater. They would come up the stream channel to my right, and they would hit the floodgate and stop.
Replacing culverts that block fish is one of the most effective ways to expand the amount of habitat available. The vast majority of the work that we propose to do is voluntary, and we can't do that work without landowners like the Apples that say, okay, we'll work with you to find some solutions that help salmon but also help the farmer.
Farmers in general, I would say, we want to better the environment. The floodgate that was in here was failing and it needed to be replaced. If they can be replaced with something that's better for fish, you know, I'm for that.
Now, for much of the flood, they can get up into the farmland, into the creek, and then when the floodwater recedes, they can get back into the river where they want to be.
I would love to see a lot more fish too. If we can contribute in our farm on this little area here, I think it's one piece of the bigger puzzle.
You know, we can't do anything without the landowners being a willing partner.
Through cooperation with our diking district and through the conservation district and NRCS and through the county, all those different groups kind of came together to make this happen. If the farm can win and everybody else that contributed to this project, it's a win for pretty much everybody. We want to do what's right for the environment as well. We just need to keep moving in that direction until we get some of this solved.
Floodplains for the Future is about reimagining the way that we manage the floodplain. Not only are we going to reduce the risk to homeowners and businesses when the next flood comes, but we're going to create a space for a thriving farming economy as well as recovering the habitat that we need to bring salmon back to the Puget Sound.
One of the challenges of integrated floodplain management is that you're essentially working with at least 3 different interests. You're working with farmers and with those who are interested in creating salmon habitat or enhancing existing habitat, as well as the county in this case, who's trying to protect infrastructure from increased flooding. And it's really hard to find those multiple benefit win-win-win projects that can do a great thing for each of those 3 interests.
Floodplains for the Future is looking to work with farms to manage the floods and purchase non-working land to create floodplains so the water has a place to go to benefit fish, farms, and reduce flood damage.
In the Clear Creek area, we've been really lucky because the farmers that we've worked most closely with use really beautiful farming methods, and they all have a deep appreciation for the soil resource as well as the habitat that their properties provide for salmon. So they've all been very concerned from the beginning about salmon habitat and use practices that promote healthier salmon habitat.
The planting project that's happening here today, hundreds of trees that are going in the ground along our drainage ditch, is a small example of something that could work to help our fields drain faster in the event of a flood, keep our ditch flowing, and also make it a more beneficial habitat for the fish that inhabit that ditch.
I think salmon and farms can be great partners in watershed recovery. With good riparian buffers and land use practices, salmon and farms can coexist well into the future.
Floodplains for the Future is a process that's leading to a safer community, a sustainable farming economy, and the habitat we need to recover our endangered salmon.
I think as human beings, we all need to be aware of our existence, of the future. What kind of legacy are you leaving for your children and your grandchildren? That's what I'd like to see, us working together to bring the salmon runs back the way they used to be.
Rivers define a place. The places that we live and work, the fundamentals of our economy, are all dependent on how the rivers have shaped the landscape. They're the most valuable part of the environment.
I live in the floodplain, and I grew up right here. Being able to come here fishing or recreating, all of those things are important to us and to our families.
As a tribal member, fishing is important. It's just a part of our lifeblood. It's essential to our way of life and our spiritual health.
was a farmer for 40 years on this piece of property. If you don't have enough water at the right time, you go broke. If you get too much water at the wrong time and damages your land and your crops, you also go broke. The river is a lifeline in effect.
So all that kind of fundamentals of life are directly connected to the river. So when you modify the river, change how the river functions, those modifications kind of ripple throughout society. The river is just doing what it's doing. It's responding to those changes in ways that really cause us problems.
I've been through multiple floods of lots of different variations.
If your land floods, it's going to be tantamount to disaster on your successful operation.
I've seen houses completely washed off their foundations. I've seen whole neighborhoods destroyed. I've seen co-workers washed away. So there's this very hard, very consequential part of this. All hope is not lost. The systems have been compromised, but they still have a lot of resiliency in them. And so if you can undo things, the river will respond. Collaboration paves the way for moving forward.
We can't do it all ourselves. Even if we could, we wouldn't want to, because this is something we need to share.
Floodplains by Design provides an environment where those discussions can occur that didn't exist before. It's much easier and much better, and I would say much more cost-effective and with a much longer design life than things that we used to do in the past.
We are optimistic. I am optimistic. We're on a mission. We're on a mission. I'm committed to that mission.
This is legacy stuff. It's people legacy, lives and property legacy, environmental legacy, sense of place legacy. It's all these things.
Teich, Tillamook, Dark Spruce, Red Chihuahua.
A lot of places that we're looking at now were a gathering place of our people. Because a place like this, it meant survival or death.
I remember coming to this property back in 1990, and I remember seeing hardly any vegetation along the stream banks, how straight the stream was through there, and all the mine tailings.
We knew there was a problem out here, and it wasn't anything that was going to recover itself, except over thousands of years.
The Middle Fork John Day it's this vital salmon habitat, and it was so damaged.
In the 1860s, they discovered gold in this valley, and hundreds, maybe even thousands of miners came in within a few years. There were little flecks of gold in the river, so they started to dig up the river. And in those days, they used manual labor, they used horses. Then the dredges were invented.
They dredge mined 200 acres across 2 miles. They'd go across, they'd work these areas and then move the boat, work these areas, move the boat. You can kind of see these layers where the rock was spit out of the side of the dredge boat.
And what was left on the floodplain was no topsoil, no vegetation, no trees for shade.
It was a moonscape of mine tailings.
We used to talk about, gee, it'd be great if the river could be restored. but we didn't think it could. We didn't think it ever would.
In 2001, the tribes acquired this property with funding from the Bonneville Power Administration.
Their goals for this land are to make it ecologically healthy and to have all the native animals and plants come back and be healthy.
When we do something, it's not only for the tribes, but for the local people and where these fish migrate to. The Confederate Tribes of Warm Springs do a lot of work enhancing the salmon runs just for that purpose.
Our children is our most valuable resources, and we want them to have what our elders passed on to us.
It benefits the Warm Springs tribe and other tribes, but it also improves recreational fishing opportunities, which helps the economy of these local rural areas.
This may be one of the largest river restoration projects that's happened in the state of Oregon.
These fish habitat projects are very important for all these tributaries that go into the Columbia.
A lot of the soil has been washed away from the dredge mining action, so we had to find soil, then take that soil and spread it over the top of these floodplains that we would construct. We've had to sort rocks back into natural conditions and then construct new channels that are meandering. While the construction was happening, we would salvage the fish and move them to other safe areas of the river. Just on this past phase, we had over 23,000 fish and frogs and other things that we pulled out of this channel for phase 5. We planted a lot of grass seed, we planted a lot of containerized plants, and then we put an irrigation system in for a few years. We put an 8-foot fence all the way around the project to keep the deer and elk out of there, to give these plants time to grow and create a new ecosystem that's valuable to both salmon and other wildlife.
And we started small with phase 1, and then that split. And then phase 3 turned into phase 3, 4, and 5. And it, a 2-year project turned into a 6-year project.
We have so many crews out here. We have a fencing crew, we have a plant crew, we have the construction crews. We also have Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We have the 2 labs that are out here, and they have crews.
So really, you think about a large project like this really takes a village to do.
There's a pool that's right on the edge of the project right now in phase 5. It's just on the eastern boundary, a massive pool. Last week we counted between 40 and 50 adult Chinook in that pool right now, and they're holding. And they're holding with excavators running beside them, and they're still holding.
I haven't seen a river become an active river so quickly. They travel all the way up the Columbia, make it around those dams, travel up the John Day River. The journey that they've made is pretty amazing.
This is important work for not just the tribes, but for all people that live in the Northwest.
If we do what we're doing in the name of fish, and we can use that, maybe it's a sneaky way of doing it, but we can do that, right? We can say that it's for the fish. But what else is it for? It's all the riparian vegetation, it's the wildlife, it's the osprey and the deer and the mule deer that come down here, the elk that come to water down here. It's all of the beautiful things that come along with that restoration. It's all connected.